There you go. Yeah. Anybody else? What might keep you from accepting God's invitation?
Rejection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, risk, discomfort,
Risk.
fear, all that stuff.
Thank you, Ellen.
You're welcome.
Could
Thank
you do
you.
me a favor and call Elma and tell her that we're back on? Okay. Yeah, so but the part that I highlighted here is that he highlighted the piece from Revelation to St. John, that those who drink of the water that I give will never be thirsty.
Mhm.
And that's what he says. It's basically also what he says to the woman at the well, right? I'm the living water. Those who drink of this water will never be thirsty. That's a pretty bold invitation. And what does it require on our part? Courage. Yeah, a little bit. Willingness.
Oh, discipline.
Yeah, and there's a lot about obedience in here.
Obedience, discipline.
Yeah, and sometimes we don't like that word. Particularly as women, sometimes I don't like that word. So that's, I've come to reframe it, but I think I struggled with it for a long time. God is always inviting, forever asking us to join God in God's life and to be obedient to God's will. Right? It's a two-parter. It's a twofer. But it's a relationship, right? It's reciprocal. It's intentional. It's, I can think of 1,000 other words, but it's a both and. Like God is always inviting, which seems amazing to us because I've issued, like there's a certain parishioner who's just refused to meet me. They get call and something's always happening. And so I've just given up. I invited for a while, but now I'm just not. I probably will go back, but that's human nature as opposed to God nature. We don't always, never gives up. And that's hard for us to wrap our heads around because people give up.
Right. And then God nudges you about things like that.
Yeah.
Like this morning, we were reading the chapter because I just got the book yesterday, I think, whatever. But anyway, so we're reading it together and there's that little nudge from God. You need to give this book to this person, like share this book with this person. And, so then that's when it comes back around for me, God nudging me, this is something you need to
That's
do.
good. Well, Ellen has some more books in there, so you can get another.
And to be obedient to God's will, which is
The second
the
part.
saying yes to God.
Yeah, so now I've got it, now I got to do it.
Yeah.
The couple in the book, for those of
In
you
chapter
who
1.
haven't gotten to it yet, they got the nudge to leave Los Angeles and go north to Northern California.
That was risky.
And they had 5 kids,
Mhm.
teenage types in school. And God said, go, didn't say go to a special place, didn't say what the lawyer was going to do when he got there, or the wife who had a good job in advertising was going to do. And yet they got their kids packed up in a car, put their furniture in storage and took off. And to me, that would be, they compared it to Abraham and how he got that sort of directive to leave everything he knew. But to me, that would be an extraordinarily difficult act of obedience.
Gutsy.
Absolutely.
And I'm not sure I would have been as, he said he had his reservations in talking to them. And I was wondering if they were part of my flock, right? And they told me this thing, I wonder how I would have responded. I might have sent them to the psychiatrist.
Yeah.
I've suggested maybe you should go up and
Visit.
check it out.
But they didn't know where to go to check out.
Exactly.
Right? And then in the end, what was it? That their ministry has blessed thousands of people.
They ended up
Abused women.
for
Yeah.
abused women and children.
Mhm.
Right.
And so it sounds easy, what you, given that book,
Yeah,
if I got time, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
But I mean, to change everything in your life would be a big call. And maybe God doesn't call us to do things that they already know that we can't do.
I think that's part of what I picked up in the first, I've read halfway through the book, and I think that's probably where it goes. Welcome, Alma. Glad you're back on with us. Glad that the internet seems to be doing that. Good. All right.
Can I say one thing?
Yes,
before you go,
please.
Alma? What Eleanor said, this was so good to hear that God knows our strengths. He knows our weaknesses. He knows so much. So it's better than we did.
Yes. So he defines call, because that in and of itself is a word we use sometimes and may not know exactly, but in this setting, in this book, he defines as God's invitation to individuals and communities in which God bids us to new life and service. I like the way he ordered that. And in that, I'm not that we do it, like I did yoga for a long time, and you can read about the health impacts of yoga, right? Or centering prayer. People will tell you, but I didn't do either one of those for the reasons. That was like how it's going to benefit me was never why I was doing it. I was doing it because I wanted a relationship with God, and I needed to quiet my body and my mind, right?
Right.
Yeah, so this is the same thing. God just bids us to this relationship, and out of that means there will be service, because that's what God does, and that's when we know that we're not alone, when we know that we're held and loved, then we can do certain things that we wouldn't even have considered we would do. I became a priest at 45. I mean, it's not quite an Abraham story, but we did, and I did know where I was going, when we sold our house and both of our cars and moved to New York City. I did know where I was going. I didn't know how that was all going to work out in the end with a 16-year-old and an 11-year-old, and a husband.
Not to mention.
Not to mention it, but I do mention it. So this presupposes some things that he lets us know about the nature of God, which is what you were saying. God knows us. God is omniscient. That's a big word, right? Omniscient, but it means all-knowing. God knows everything. And I've lived a long time with thinking that there was just like, well, God does not really care about this part of me. Like I can just, and he does, and she does, and they do. Every part of me. But, that's just the way I've functioned for a long time. That's just not, it's just not, I don't really want to look at that. So I'm hoping God doesn't want to look at that either.
You try and hide it. I try and hide things from God.
Sure.
And then you're like laughing at yourself. Like, okay, how's that working for you?
Yeah.
Yeah, God, are you sure you were calling me to do this?
That's right, yeah. Can we discuss it?
So this is one of the things that we, and as Episcopalians, we believe this, or as Christians, we believe it. Some faith traditions do not believe that about God, that God is all-knowing,
They don't?
No.
Wow.
Like a deist would believe that, right?
But he
God
got it started and then left.
and then left. It's, kind of up to us. So there are different traditions for which, and then maybe we don't, what is it, some people are like functional atheists, right? We're like, we believe in God, yet we don't have a relationship. So, and I'm not saying that from time to time, probably all of us have been there. Like I'm not judging them, not saying that. I'm saying that there are the ebbs and flows of life and time and other pressures that create that, and how knowing though that God knows all of that and still is persistent.
So we talked about it's been the call, obviously, the invitation, and that, God knows what our gifts are and so forth, but there seems like there's another element, maybe I'm
No, go ahead.
saying, but I think part of fulfilling the call or calls is that God also puts other people in our life to help us fulfill that. It does a lot of things like that. You get little nudges here and there, I believe God thinks. And so it's not just about what you already have. It's about the path that you're on and that choose to go around, go down, all that, so. Maybe
Absolutely.
that's covered in chapter I haven't gotten to yet.
Well, it is. I mean, if we talk about what he says as part of these three things that, then we've talked about the nature of God, and then there's the nature of humanity, that we have free will. We can choose to ignore God's call. We can choose to wait. We can choose to say, not right now. We can, choose that God allows us that freedom. And what I put in there is that God respects our dignity. That, in that.
But
we
I'm
have that gift.
talking about something even a little different, that is beyond choice and everything. As we try work to fulfill our call and use our gifts, I think God puts other people in our lives for a reason, puts other circumstances in our lives, put where we are in relation to things. There's a lot of
Absolutely.
that going on. I think.
That's his grace that he pours on us.
Yeah, but
Yes.
he's helping us. I mean,
Yeah, exactly. So, and the third part is that call is ongoing, and it's as varied as our need and as of God's purpose. Not just that I might be a good, I don't know what it would be. Not that I might be a good sermon writer, but maybe that's God's purpose to be able to preach a good sermon or a sermon that reaches people, right? Like, I never thought of that. I mean, I think I thought of it, I just never articulated it. That it somehow, I can't remember who, I think Parker Palmer says, your call is where your greatest joy meets the world's greatest need, right? Those two things are what equals call. And sometimes I overlook God's purpose in that. I mean, I think God's behind it, but I might be overlooking it. So, yeah.
I think sometimes too, I mean, we did mission work for years in different Caribbean islands and then 11 years in Navajo land. And towards the end, the last 2 years we were in Navajo land, and Bob and I were the leaders along with our priest at the time. And I just kind of felt like maybe it's time to move on. And it kind of got stronger and stronger. And Bob didn't feel that way yet. And, so we went through this discerning, if you will, and it really was time for us to step away. That was the call, to step away from a ministry that we'd had for 20 years.
You already answered a big call.
Yeah. But that was a struggle for me, and to give that up because you had all these relationships and you poured your heart out into this ministry. And it's like, God's telling us now it's time to back off and let someone else take the lead and continue with it. And it was hard.
Very hard.
Very hard.
Thank you. Yeah.
So it can be either a calling into or a calling to
Move to the
move
next
to the
one.
next ministry, whatever that may be.
And those
Yeah,
are
Pam, I think that's what Allison said when they said in here, it's not a once in a lifetime event. It's an ongoing process. So I see that too.
Yeah.
And I'm happy for that, because there is a thing about, is God done doing, Ginger said this to me the other day, God's not done doing a good work in any of us. No matter what now, it may be more difficult, it may look different, it may be, whatever it is, but I think that's the other part. There's always something that God has in store for us. Always.
I think some of you have heard my deal about in April, we were in Paris and Notre Dame's closed. We went to St. Sulpice, which is the biggest working church in Paris now. And it was right before Holy Week, and a lot of the side altars were open for prayer. And I went into the Sacred Heart of Jesus, the statue of Jesus with his heart on the outside. And I was asking, what do you want me to do? What are you calling me to do, Lord? And we'll hear about one of the crazy people hear words sometimes, and maybe you hear with your heart sometimes as opposed to your ears. And the answer was, Eleanor, my name, Eleanor, you are enough. And I'd been trying to translate French all week, and I said, Lord, do you mean that I've done enough? And the answer was, Eleanor, you are enough. And so I just sort of sat with that for weeks. And I think sometimes what we think is call is we're doing it for our own benefit. And God does, we do benefit from answering call. But if our intention is, I want to feel better about myself, I want to be, involved in the holiness of your, that kind of stuff, then I think I might hear, you are enough. You don't have to do anything else to make me love you, like go on another mission trip. I love you. I'll let you know what you need to do next. And so I think there's intentionality sometimes in the why are we answering call.
Yeah. And I think that next part here speaks to that, because you think of call as a job,
Yeah.
a vocation, avocation, thing. And this idea that we are called to salvation is just a beautiful idea to me. This is both a gift, salvation, and a call that we receive by grace, and it's unearned and it's activated by our belief, by our faith. So this is what God's first call to us is, to salvation, to be saved. So that's rewarding to me. And then the second one would be that we are called to holiness, and he uses that word in the sense of servanthood.
Thank you so much.
And or sanctification, or to be a saint, or to be holy, hagios. That's the Greek word. Again, also a gift, just by our very life, but it has to be lived into in the many ways that you do that. Eleanor is thinking about you and the conversation about POA, about going the Property Owners Association, whether that was actually a place you needed to be, right? So it's how you live into your holiness in all the places that you go. Ingalls. That might be a chore. How do we do that, right? Where, many of you are retired, so there's not the job situation so much, but from, how do we, in our families, when they can be difficult, how do we live out being that servant in that sense? And that call and a challenge.
There's the wonder for me too, because there was a part about being the light and the set apart. We're supposed to be recognizable, if you will, in our faith. And I'm like, ooh, that's not always working for me, but sometimes, I don't know. Sometimes I think you're just somewhere and you smile at a person. And so, it's not like they know I'm a Christian, but it makes a difference.
Yes, it does.
And so, I think that how you live into it in your neighborhood, your home, your job, and your community, I think it's not always easy. Like someone wouldn't walk away and say, oh, that person's a Christian. I want to be more like that, but it's still our call to be that light.
Right. So it's in response to God's.
Well, I don't know that
These
anyone
relationships.
thinks that I'm a Christian, but I know that when you're going into Ingles out or in the store and you smile at somebody and say good morning, you can tell by the light on their face you've made a difference in their day.
I think Ingles is a real good place to do a lot of things.
Yeah.
A lot of good things and not so good things.
Thank you. Yeah. And we are called to ministry, which is sort of what we probably thought of first. When I said things you're called to, you might have thought about ministry. When I say call, what is your call? But he says the word ministry equals the word servant. And how are we going to serve? We are called to serve. And then we are all called to serve. This is something that people say, well, no, not me. That's the Moses story. No, not me. No, not me. I don't. And then it says, as Bishop Little said, we listen then. for the specifics of that call. And then we were called to community. The word there is the Greek word ecclesia, which doesn't mean a building. We sometimes interpret it as a building. The community to which we're called is the church. So it's church and churches, as he writes it. So it is the world. It is the community of people. It is also the church of the worshiping body that worships God. So. All right, and then there was this conversation about how God calls us. And I said, let us count the ways. And you might have more to add to this list, but these are the ones that come to mind. A theophany means some sort of showing forth of God. Theo is the word for God in Greek. So it shows, so it's some way that God shows forth God's self. Maybe that's in the grilled cheese sandwich situation. You know, some people have kept their grilled cheese sandwich for 25 years because it has a picture of Jesus on it, or a potato that looks like the Virgin Mary, or whatever it is, the potato chip. Or it could be for years, Mary appeared in Conyers, Georgia, at the monastery. Or she's appeared at Lourdes in France, or she's appeared as in
Guadalupe.
at Guadalupe,
Yeah.
right? In Fatima, right?
Medical.
Some, and someplace out in the Midwest.
There's a
Yeah.
place in Ireland too. Forget the name.
Knock.
Knock.
Yeah, so we know of these sightings of these things that have happened that have a great appeal to some people and that have really meant a lot to the people who have experienced that. So then there's maybe just, again, that would fall into the sort of dramatic manifestation. This is what happens. Can you think of like a Saul, you know, when Saul fell off his horse, that kind of a thing, some way that we have been stopped. And I've heard, you know, John Owen give his testimony about how he came to do prison ministry, and it was very powerful.
Yeah.
Good.
So, I mean, I've heard those stories from people, and they're not, I always feel privileged to hear them because you don't know how they're going to be received.
Right.
You know, it's just, do I know you well enough? Are you going to believe it? Are you going to hold it with the same sacredness in which I'm speaking it? Right? It's
Or are you gonna say, really?
yeah. I know, because and then I think how many times I've said to somebody, really? You know.
Yeah.
But so then the next one would be sort of a voice, God actually speaking to us. Has anybody ever had? You may not want
I
to
think
admit
that's
that
what
here.
Eleanor just shared
Yeah,
with us.
There you
Yes.
go. It was an audible voice, right?
Yeah. You are enough.
I think the one we most relate to might be this inner prompting,
Mhm.
what you call, Pam, a nudge.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Nudges happen.
yeah, right. We just know something. As we used to say to our kids, in your knowing place, you just know something.
Yeah, we, one year at our church years ago, when our kids were little, they did a God sighting during Lent. It's like everybody would intentionally make note of things, like where you're, like you can just step out the door and see a bird and you're like, oh, thank you, Lord. And so we did this as a whole church community, and we get together weekly and have these talks. And it's amazing how I and other people said as well, they became more attuned to God's, you know, God's work in their life.
That intentionality.
Yeah.
That's what my tidings article is about.
Cool, yeah.
I read it.
Yes.
When I was a child, I developed this inordinate, paralyzing fear of death. And it stayed with me for many, many, many years until adulthood, until I was living here in Cashels. And one Easter morning, I was sitting early in the morning having my tea. And I said, Lord, I said, please take this fear away from me. And I prayed and I prayed and I said, now, you know, you don't have to do it like today.
But you got to the bar.
But
That's
it takes this fear. So Val and I went to church Easter Sunday. Virginia came out, and as was her wont to do, she just never read a note and stood outside of the podium. And she looked up, and she also had this habit of her theme, she would repeat twice in starting her sermon. And she said, "Do not be afraid."
Do not feel what?
Afraid.
Oh,
Mhm.
Do not be afraid. I thought, does everybody know God's talking to me? I mean, true.
But you
And
knew
guess
it
what?
was-
You weren't afraid after that. Oh.
Yeah, that's one of the things, and through another person.
Yeah.
You can hear a call through another person. Often, somebody you know, could be someone that you admire. It just could be someone, it's an accident, that you just run into. I was on the way to see Maisie in the hospital, and I hadn't eaten, and it was already 4 o'clock. So I have to admit that I pulled into the Arby's right there past 26. And I went in and I got a sandwich, and I'm fixing my sandwich, and the man comes up to me. He's been seated, and he looks like he's lived outside a great deal of his life. He's eating there, and he says to me, "You look really nice. Are you a professional?"
Did you have your collar on?
I did, and I said, and my name tag. On my
There
name
you
tag.
go.
And I said, he says, and I said, "Well, I'm a priest. I'm on the way to see a parishioner." He said, "Do you bless people?" I said, "All the time." He said, "Will you pray for me? My name is David." And I said, "Let's just do it." Put down my sandwich, we prayed together. I picked up my sandwich and walked out to the car. If I wouldn't have had that Arby's, as much as Todd was like, "You ate at Arby's," as much as I had to, but I never would have met him. I never would have had that
And he
opportunity.
needed that prayer.
And I needed to be reminded on the way to see somebody that I feel very close to in this parish, who might have been near, not death particularly, but a long recovery.
Yeah.
And when no one really sure yet, because we hadn't received any of that information about
Right.
the pathology. So I was, which I always do when I go to visit anyone, particularly like that, is I always think about what is, I feel not up to the thing, like representing the church or representing Jesus or bringing healing or praying the right thing, and we're just being present, not being thinking like, how long do I have to be there? Because it's not pleasant. It's not, you don't ever know what you're gonna encounter in the hospital. There'll be somebody naked, there'll be somebody, doing something you don't want to see, there'll be somebody screaming, there'll be, it's just like, and then I had David, and I felt like maybe God just put me there to pray
He
with him.
did.
He did. So
He
I
was
did.
preparing you for the visit.
He was. It made it seem much, yeah, it did. And it also took my mind off what was happening, because I was able to think about David and his needs all the way the
Put
rest.
it in a different perspective.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing I was talking,
Mhm.
not just your gifts. It's the circumstances.
God works them out.
Yeah. And so calls can come, and then I was thinking, Pam, about what you were saying about your work and mission work, can come when we are broken. Frequently when we are ill or in a bad place, we sort of have that latitude to not be so, have everything under control so tightly. Then we feel there's an openness even in pain. Sometimes when we are busiest, God figures out a way there in the face of our fears. And sometimes in the form of a question, again, how do I need to be? What are you calling me to? What am I supposed to do now? There is no one way, no right way. And that is the practice of discernment. And that word we use a lot in church talk, it just means basically sifting. It's just the constant sifting of what has happened. So you have to do what? We have to pay attention. We've said that already. We have to kind of be awake, alert, look for things that we might overlook, not take anything for granted, but which is, you know, when a busy life, that's hard to say.
But it seems like it's all about doing the sifting with love in your heart. That sort of thing. It's not just the sifting.
No, it's a particular kind of,
Yeah.
of the way. There's a lot of talk, like, I know you guys have, the folks that have been in the business world, that for the last 20 years, there's been a lot of talk about things like discernment and how we do that. And what does that mean in a corporate sense? I get that too. And a lot of consultants are flying their flags around and, you know, going into businesses and helping employees try to figure out if they're at the best kind of job for them, if they're suited for the work that usually it happens after a buyout, not before.
And you have corporate culture employees now
Yeah,
who actually are in a bigger corporation dealing with the culture of the community of that corporation.
Yeah.
Which that was non-existent a while ago.
sure. Right. And so some of our things have been picked up, some things that we have lay fallow in the church have been picked up in other ways in the community. When people talk about mindfulness, you see that a lot. Mindfulness in eating, mindfulness in working, mindfulness in all of that kind of stuff.
In our words.
Yeah. So
Very important.
right.
We met this bishop. She was friends with our rector, and she came to visit, and she was talking about discernment, discerning a call, you know, more in a ministry, ordained ministry kind of fashion. And she said that for her calling, people saw it in her before she saw it in herself. And it was confirming then for her when she finally felt the call. And, you know, now she's a bishop, but it was like, wow, you know, and how many times have you looked at people and just thought, I see something in them, or, you know.
Like DOK just saw in you, and we appreciate so much you answering that call.
Well,
Absolutely.
you let me know about that later.
Sure.
I'm just
All right, let's get to Abraham, because he's number one. And this also works almost chronologically. This is the way Bishop Little has arranged this. There are questions at the end of every chapter that I hope will inform your own kind of prayer time and your own reflection on the material. I'm not going to cover them today because we did do these two kind of chapters in 1 week. We will spend more time on some of them. We do two after we get into the habit of it. And I wonder if someone would feel qualified this morning to read Abraham, this piece from Genesis. This is the text that Bishop Little drew this reflection from.
Is it on your paper?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's on page 2.
Yeah.
Or on the back of
page one.
prologue, not the syllabus. This one that looks, it's on the back of that side. I consolidated paper.
Good.
Yes.
You want me
Yeah.
to read it?
Yes, I'd love for you to read
You
it.
want to read it, Mark?
No,
Why
no.
don't you read it?
It's not very comfortable for you, Ellen.
Well, okay. You're next, okay?
All right, I'll be next.
All right. Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarah, his son Abram's wife, and they went out together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. I don't believe that. Okay, now.
So that's where you put that.
Go for it.
Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, as you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed.
So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed Haran.
It was a two-step move. You know, you might have forgotten that. He first went to Haran, which was not far removed from Ur. I loved knowing a little bit about Ur, that it was a cultural center, that it had running water perhaps, or a sewage system, and, you know, great plays and music and food, and, you know, and then he said, no, I want you to go to, I don't know, Jonesboro, Tennessee.
Is anybody here from Jonesboro?
I was trying to think of someplace that was, you know, removed. Kansas, I don't know.
Timbuktu is a pretty good.
It's a
That's
good
good.
answer, right? So he, and then while he was in Haran, he got this other call to take his family and go and receive this twofold promise that God gave him. And so I asked the question, does God, and this is the same question Bishop Little asked, does God challenge people to take risks? And
Yeah.
of course, in his story in chapter 1, he tells that story of a family who did take a risk. And I remember several years ago, there was a family in Atlanta who fairly well off, lived in Sandy Springs, had a big house. You may have read about them. They sold everything and gave half of their money to several charities and decided they could live on half of their money. And then they did it again. So they had 2 children, and they came and spoke at the church because I was so overwhelmed by this idea of somebody. Now they were very well off. Okay. And I can't imagine that many people could have done that, but they did. And it doesn't really matter. I don't think they were looking for people to join them or anything else. They just felt called to do that. And they weren't really particularly in a religious community. They were not, didn't go to, I mean, they didn't go to Holy Innocents. They weren't people we knew, but I read their story in the newspaper and I was like, why don't you come talk to us about just what that was like and how you did that? Not the logistics of how you sold your house and liquidated your assets, but you know, how did you do that? Mentally, emotionally,
An
like,
interesting discussion.
and his family came and his children also spoke. So it was really awesome. It was just a really awesome thing. And he went on to, you know, I can't remember even now what he did, but you know, the kids went to public school. They made that decision. They took him out of Westminster, put him in public school. I'm just, you know, that's a call.
That's a call.
You know, and he may not have attributed it to God. He never used the word God in his conversation about it. But it was, you know, we can fill in the blanks for him. Yeah. So I think about that family quite a bit. I mean, they did it with conversation among themselves. So maybe, but perhaps like you and Bob, having conversations about when time to leave a ministry. Yeah. Well, so the backstory, so they were moving from all that was known to them to something unknown. They moved from the center of culture to what? To where? To nothing they knew. This wasn't
Different
like
language.
Yeah, they didn't have family there. He didn't have a job. Well, maybe it says he also took I think they took some of their belongings in terms of maybe they had some, maybe they didn't. I mean, there were nomads, right? That has been a practice for thousands and thousands of years of people who live a nomadic life and move to where the grazing is and all that. So he just kind of probably joined in those caravans of folks traveling from place to place, looking for water and food and so on. So, but God's call, he says, is a double command and a double promise. Leave everything. So perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps he didn't take any cows or sheep or camels with him. Leave everything. That's pretty clear. Pretty hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a radical act of obedience and this permanent separation he's making. Go where I tell you. This becomes the gift, a gift of land and offspring. This is the first time God makes, we already know this part, right? That God makes this covenant with people. This is a different kind of covenant than he's made in the past. It's not a rainbow. This is a relationship. I will be your God and you will be my people.
Yeah, and God takes a risk, because Abraham could have gone and then said, okay, I'm done.
This isn't what I.
I didn't
Right.
sign up for
Didn't sign up
this.
for this one.
So that, you know, that concept of God being a risk taker was really, gave me a lot to think about.
And through Abram, God creates a people.
Mhm.
I like the way he writes about what is your Ur.
Yeah.
That hit me really strong.
You go, what is your Ur? Yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, because that's just so, in some ways, it feels like a deterrent to go forward.
She's asking, what is your Ur?
Home,
Maybe you're still, okay. Maybe
No,
you're
no,
still-
I mean,
maybe you're
yeah,
still-
no, I mean,
I would say finances,
yeah, I mean,
money
just
for him.
comfort, if you will, you know, is that, but I do think it's a deterrent. And I think frequently that to have faith in God, requires you to think of him, her, as having a plan. And kind of silly to think that he went to this effort to make us and not have a plan for us. And discerning that plan is life's ambition, life's goal, whatever. Because it's like, it's incongruous to not think that way, to me.
I want to go back to Doreen's story when, you know, if you are afraid of something, like, I mean, that's something that a logical fear, or it could be illogical, right? But a fear that you have, how much that can become an Ur, like where you're stuck in a way. So an Ur could be something both interior, or could be something exterior, could be both. I think that's a good question to ponder. If either, Laura, if you have anything to add about that, or, you know, if you consider what your Ur is.
For me, my Ur is what's unfamiliar. You know, anxiety is my Ur.
Yeah, thank you.
I think sometimes my Ur is being concerned about my my persona, or how people perceive me, or, you know, do people think I'm good enough? That kind of Ur, you know, for me is one of them for sure. But internally, spiritually, you know, fit, yeah. Like, was I a good enough mother? You know, all that kind of stuff.
Anyone else feel so ready to share?
His question is, where do you feel most comfortable, most settled and at home? That's our Ur, I think.
Yes.
And for me, it's easy. It's here.
Right.
And
Cashier's a good shepherd. That's not
Yeah.
her.
yeah, me too.
We agree.
And so if God were to call me to go back to Haiti, for instance, I would suggest perhaps we discuss it.
That was enough. I don't
No,
need to
no,
hear, hey.
she would want to discuss it, and she'd want to be in charge of the discussion.
You're right,
That's
of course.
the answer.
Of course.
Hey,
Of course.
Would be me.
but I think it's also, and because the next question, what is the promised land to which God calls you? And I think it can be an emotional, you know, thing like anxiety could be your Ur, because in your effort to avoid it, right, that's where you're stuck, right? That's where your Ur is, in your effort to avoid whatever it is that makes you feel uncomfortable, unsure. I think that could go.
Yeah,
together with-
And it's like, I often hear Ginger say, and I appreciate it because I can relate to it, the things that drive you crazy about other people, you should be
Yeah.
looking this way.
It's my own worst fault.
Absolutely, yes. Me too.
I think that's pretty.
Yeah.
It shakes you up
Human
when
stuff.
you realize that,
Yeah,
but when
yeah.
you wake up, like, oh, bingo, that's it. But when we decided to retire, we planned to spend half the year at Ponte Vedra, where we had a condo, and the other half in Atlanta, where we had a house. And just by some lark in the intermediate years, we had never come to Highlands or Cashers. We had shared a house at Lake Raven with friends. So we went there and never came further north. But another friend said, we're going to Cashers this weekend, come go with us. We said, well, okay. And we came and we worshiped at Good Shepherd and we drove around the town. And Jack said, I think we need to come back. I think this place looks pretty good. I said, well, God may be calling us here. And so we came back 2 weeks later and we looked at property and of course worshiped here. And it was home immediately. And before we bought that lot, Jack said, well, how about let's us go just before dark. And we laid on the hood of the car and looked up at the sky. And as the stars came out and the night was a beautiful night, I said, Jack, I think God's calling us right here. He said, I do too. Let's buy the lot and build a house. And we did. And I still live in it.
You all these years later, sitting in this kind of environment and talking about this as your hurt.
Well, no, I didn't anticipate that, but I will say that there have been times through the years that I know when Virginia came and she asked me to be senior warden, I said, Virginia, I've done that job already one time. I got to go pray about this. I'm not sure God wants me to do that. Okay. So Psalm 25 came up and I answered, okay, if you put up with me, I'll do what you asked me to do.
So
We had a great time.
That was
I'm
the
being,
kiss.
I'm being kind of funny, but she was probably praying, Lord, please make her senior warden. You know, so you're trying, she's like putting it in her plug.
Well, she may have.
That's what, you know, that's the whole both football teams pray.
Yeah.
You know, that's
That's exactly
the
right.
whole thing. Yes.
The kiss of death was when she asked you to do something and she said, I want you to pray about it. Because you do. You were sold.
You already have.
So as we're sitting here and I'm thinking when, you know, Ginger said that this place and church was her sometimes the is also the blessing. I mean,
Oh, it is a blessing.
is the blessing as well,
Oh, yeah.
because I feel like we've all been put here. And I wonder, as I get older and older and older, and obviously physically there's less, you know, maybe that you can do, but then there's other things that we can do. But I wonder, I guess I wonder where that balance is.
Well, I don't know, but having just had a 90th birthday, I have said to the Holy Spirit lately, okay, you've just blessed me so great all these years, and I thank you. And I don't know how much more time you're gonna let me boogie around here, but whatever you say is good with me. But tell me what you want me to do and stay with me so I don't make too many boo-boos. And then this book comes up, and I thought it was gonna be just Old Testament. And it comes up, knowing you're calling, responding. I thought, okay, Holy Spirit, you're trying to tell me, study the book.
As we progress in this adventure together. I have I've been being nudged for quite a few years to do something.
Okay.
It's something that is not going to be a popular thing.
Oh, boy.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And so I, at some point, maybe all of you, I will share and you can help me in this process.
Well, it just may be what the Holy Spirit wants us to do, so you'll have to share it with us.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes can't you get called to do something? I mean, you think you get called to do something that ain't really a call? So,
I used to have-
okay,
He's
y'all
got
have 11 o'clock.
a priest friend in Fort
Virginia, you
Lauderdale,
gave
so
me
it's either the Holy Spirit or gas.
It's either the Holy Spirit or yes. Did you hear that, Ellen? That's good. Ellen, did you hear that?
I'm so sorry.
It's either the Holy Spirit or gas.
Yeah, we had a priest friend.
Love that. So I love that.
Well, we know about some disciples who decided to take a call, to leave everything.
Mhm.
That's another example we have. of,
Yeah.
Someone who's answered calls. Right?
St. Patrick in Ireland. I
Yeah,
mean, so
that's a
many.
good one. Yes. Yeah.
I know, but
St. Francis, speaking of St. Francis.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, well, he took off all of his clothes and then sold some stuff that didn't belong to him. So
It made his daddy mad.
They sure did. So, the call is illustrating that he says that in Abraham's call is moving from security to insecurity. And the insecurity of obedience, that we make that call, that we make that move because we are obedient to God. And along the way, discovering the faithfulness of God and a depth of friendship with God beyond our understanding. And I just think that's, if I have a takeaway, it's this idea of relationship and God's desire to be in relationship with me, and that the call fulfills God's desire to be in relationship.
Yeah.
And so if there's like if you want a thing that says, what's that, how would I know? Right. And maybe that's
the measure.
what's the rubric? I know it because God and I are in this together, Now, how do you know that? That's different for every person, but I think that might be a way to kind of judge, well, if I'm doing this thing, are God and I in this? Is this deepening my relationship with God? Or is this causing, when you get to a point where you do see it's time for a change, is this injuring my relationship with God? Is my relationship with God damaged by this? And I think that's we don't like to admit that often, but Todd and I have been to like marriage counseling many times in our life. We've probably been married, besides being married twice, really, we've been married
To each other.
yeah.
Yeah.
But probably about 7 times, right? Just, the changes, your relationship and all the stuff. And I just remember having conversations about that same thing. Like, if these things aren't bringing us together, why are we doing them? And that's hard, because the things that might be causing you to not be together might be work, church, it's like
Yeah.
community
Your
stuff.
children.
Your
if there's
children
a-
sometimes, absolutely. If there's a disagreement about that,
Mhm.
which there frequently was, not to them, I'm sure they picked it up somehow, but it just, so I think that's the same thing with our relationship with God. If it's not not growing our relationship, then it's harming it. Right? But again, that's not going to push God away. God will still be there. God will still be
Right.
God. So, okay.
And try another tactic. with us.
Yes, right. And God's call is meant to lead us fully into friendship. So go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Take your thing. We'll be here next week. We'll do chapter 2, God's persistent call. So this idea that God never turns us loose, we're going to